I will never forget the moment at my mother's wedding when a whispered voice cut through the celebration. Hannah is just a stepchild. My name is Hannah Reed. My heart felt crushed as I realized my entire childhood might have been built on a lie. A birth certificate, missing my father's name. A stranger's eyes fixed on me. Suddenly, everything fell apart. What would you do if your whole family turned their back on you, and you no longer knew where you truly belonged? The sound of the church bells should have felt like a blessing, but to me it rang hollow, almost mocking. My mother Laura stood at the altar, radiant in her cream lace dress, holding hands with Thomas, the man who was now officially my stepfather. Everyone around us smiled politely, clapped politely, and whispered softly in the pews. But among those whispers, I caught one that sliced through me like glass. Hannah isn't even his real daughter, you know. For a moment, I thought I had misheard. Maybe it was just gossip about someone else. But the way my aunt shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my eyes, told me it was about me. I froze in place, the smile plastered on my face, faltering. My fork hovered over the slice of wedding cake in front of me, untouched. My mind pulled me back to a dozen nights when I had asked my mother about my father. Her answers had always been vague. He had to leave, she'd say, or it's complicated. Then she'd busy herself with the dishes, her back to me, ending the conversation before it ever truly began. Those evasions had once seemed like grief, but now, in this church filled with perfumed laughter and clinking glasses, they curdled into suspicion. I told myself to breathe, to not let the panic show. If anyone saw the tremor in my hands, it would only confirm the whispers. I smiled, stiff and practiced, and made my way to the reception hall next to the church. The decorations were modest, roses set in mason jars, white drapes hung unevenly, but to the townsfolk, it was charming. To me, it felt suffocating, every corner echoing with chatter that might, or might not, be about me. I drifted between the tables, pretending to refill my drink when my Aunt Rose touched my arm. Her eyes were damp but steady, and her hand trembled slightly as she squeezed my shoulder. "Not everything is what it seems, Hannah," she whispered, her voice nearly drowned by the music. "You'll understand someday." Then she slipped away, leaving me with nothing but the echo of her words. I tried to shake it off. I wanted to focus on the music, on the clumsy dancing of the cousins, on the way my mother's laugh rose above it all. But then, while collecting empty plates, I noticed a small stack of envelopes and folded papers tucked into one of the gift bags. At first, I assumed it was just more well wishes or a check from a relative. Something about the edge of the paper sticking out drew me in. My fingers moved before my thoughts could stop them. Inside, I found a photocopy of a birth certificate. My heart seized when I saw my own name, Hannah Reed. The date matched, the place matched, even my mother's name was there, but the line for father was blank. Not crossed out, not smudged, simply left empty. A chill spread through me, my skin prickling as if someone had poured ice water down my back. My vision blurred with the sudden rush of blood to my head. This wasn't just gossip. This wasn't just a cruel whisper. It was ink on paper. It was silence made official. I stuffed the photocopy back quickly, my hands clumsy, but when I lifted my head, I realized someone was watching me. Across the room by the far table near the exit, a woman I didn't recognize stood with her arms folded. She wasn't smiling like the others. Her lips curved into something subtler, an almost knowing expression. Her eyes locked with mine, steady and unreadable. She looked as though she had been waiting for this very moment, for me to discover something I wasn't supposed to see. I couldn't look away. She raised her glass slightly, like a quiet toast only I was meant to notice before turning back into the crowd. My pulse hammered in my ears. Who was she? Why was she here? And how could she look at me with such certainty, as though she knew the answer to a question I had been afraid to ask my entire life? The room around me continued with its laughter, its clinking forks, its shallow joy. But for me, time had split open. The wedding wasn't just about my mother's new beginning, it was the start of my unraveling. Dinner after the wedding felt less like a celebration and more like a rehearsal for a family I didn't recognize. Thomas's new house smelled of fresh paint. Evelyn arrived without knocking and slipped into the chair beside my mother as though the seat had been saved for her. She poured my mother more wine, smiled at Thomas, and studied me with the calm of someone who believes she belongs. I kept my hands folded. The photocopied birth certificate pulsed in my mind, the line for father, blank as a held breath. The whispers from the church still clung to me. Aunt Rose's grip on my arm, every fragment of the day pressed down on the table with the plates. Thomas carved the roast. My mother asked if I wanted more potatoes in a voice that tried to be normal. Evelyn said, "Let me," and slid a spoonful onto my plate. "New beginnings," she announced, tapping her fork against her glass. "Sometimes the past only complicates a day that should be simple." "Some things don't become simple because we pretend they are," I said. My tone was mild, almost clinical. My mother's gaze fell to the napkin she was smoothing and stayed there. Evelyn's smile thinned. "There are secrets," she said softly. "Better left alone. Not everything buried needs to be exhumed." She looked to Thomas, and he nodded without looking up. I watched them. Evelyn measured each word like a person who had already seen the last page. Thomas kept moving. Pour, pass, wipe, as if he could outrun a conversation. After the dishes were cleared, Evelyn steered the talk toward forms and folders. "Addresses, insurance cards, emergency contacts," she said, laughing lightly. "It's amazing how much paperwork families accumulate. Laura, I can help with all of that." My mother nodded. "That would be helpful." "From now on," Thomas said, setting his glass down with a careful click, "Hannah doesn't need to worry about paperwork anymore." The sentence landed like a verdict. He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at Evelyn. "I didn't know I was worrying," I answered. "You don't have to," he said. "We'll take care of the details." The word we snagged like a burr. I thought of the blank line. I thought of Evelyn taking the seat at my mother's side before I could. I thought of how easily I had been edited out. My mother stood to make tea. Evelyn followed, reciting a list, warranties, taxes, medical records, as if she had already inventoried the house. Thomas stacked plates, then stopped and scrolled his phone. I excused myself to the hallway bathroom but kept walking to my mother's room. The door was ajar. The new quilt looked stiff, the framed photos carefully arranged. On the dresser sat a small linen pouch tied with a ribbon, the kind hardware stores loop around duplicate keys. I didn't plan to touch it. My fingers did that for me. Inside, a brass key lay warm from the room, its teeth worn, the bow etched with a shallow curl. It was the sort of key that belonged to something kept close and hidden. A lockbox, a private drawer, a small safe, tucked behind sweaters. "Hannah!" my mother called from the kitchen. "Peppermint or black?" "Peppermint," I said, keeping my voice steady. I slid the key back into the pouch, then paused. The ribbon was new, the metal wasn't. I pressed the key into my palm until the edges marked my skin. When I returned, Evelyn was refolding napkins that didn't need refolding. Thomas wiped an already clean counter. No one asked where I had been. The kettle clicked off. Cups met saucers. We performed our parts. Later, while helping my mother carry blankets to the guest room, I felt the pouch in my coat pocket. When had I slipped it there? The stairs creaked beneath us. "It'll all settle," my mother murmured. Back in the hallway, the heater cut on. I closed my fist around the weight of the key and felt something steady inside me answer. I didn't know what the key opened. I only knew I would find it. And that tonight had taught me where to start. I waited until the house sank into the hush that follows new vows and old wine. The hallway nightlight threw a thin ribbon of gold along the floorboards, enough to guide me back to my mother's room without a betraying switch. The key burned a half moon in my palm. I told myself I was only looking for proof, not trouble. But truth has a way of prying up floorboards even when you beg it to stay quiet. The closet held a cedar chest that hadn't moved in years. Behind folded quilts and a shoebox of ornaments lay a gray lockbox, the kind for passports and birth certificates. It was small enough to hide, heavy enough to matter. I eased it onto the bedspread and listened for footsteps. The house breathed. No one stirred. The key turned with the intimate click of something long matched. Inside, envelopes were tied with a fading blue ribbon. A stack of Polaroids, a clipped wedding announcement with edges soft from being reread. Beneath them, a single letter weighted in a cream envelope. My mother's handwriting swept the front, but in the top corner, a hurried scrawl seemed added at the last second. Henry. Evelyn's line from dinner brushed my ear, secrets better left alone. I lowered myself to the floor with the lockbox and broke the seal. Dear H, it began. If I had your courage, I'd tell the whole town. Instead, I tell this paper, because paper doesn't push or pity. I could hear my mother's voice in each measured sentence. She wrote about a winter here when the diner sign ticked down to 10 degrees and a pickup broke by the feed store. About a dance she hadn't planned to attend, and a laugh she hadn't planned to love. People here keep ledgers of each other, she went on. I have kept my own, of hours worked, of groceries bought, of little shoes that always seemed a size too small. The letter never called him father, it called him Henry. You were my friend before you were anything else, she wrote, and that is the part I have allowed the town to see. Then, if anything happens to me, there's a folder in the cedar chest. I have tried to keep her safe from our mistakes. The blank line on my birth certificate pulsed again, no longer an emptiness but a narrow bridge. I read the page twice, then a third time, hunting for certainty the ink refused to give. There was only the name pushed into the corner of the envelope, as if even in private my mother left the door cracked. I sorted through the rest. A clinic bill from the month before I was born, a recipe card in someone else's slanted hand, Henry's chili. A black and white photo of a summer softball game, my mother in sunglasses, a man at her shoulder, both caught mid-smile. He stood just close enough to cast the same shadow. Who are you? I whispered to his smile. And why were you allowed to be everything but named? I folded the letter along its creases, slid it back into the envelope, and stared again at the hurried word, Henry, written like a promise that couldn't bear daylight. I wanted to wake my mother and ask her to speak to the silence. I wanted Aunt Rose's hand back on my shoulder at the church, this time with answers. I wanted Evelyn off our porch, out of our kitchen, out of the story entirely. Instead, I sat with the paper and let the weight of years settle where panic had been. Outside, a dog barked. The heater clicked on. I returned the envelopes to the lockbox in the order I found them. A small ritual for a woman who had loved me in every way except the one that would have spared me this question. I slid the box into the closet and stood with the key cooling in my fist. The floorboard by the door creaked. I turned. Evelyn's silhouette filled the doorway, pale in the nightlight, her hand on the frame as if it belonged there. Her voice was warm and empty as a hotel hallway. What are you looking for, Hannah? Aunt Rose chose the corner booth at the only cafe in town that still served coffee in thick white mugs. The bell over the door gave its small-town jingle when I walked in, the same sound that used to announce my mother at 7 a.m. on Sundays. Rose lifted her hand, palm soft and steady, and I sat opposite her, the vinyl seat sighing like it was relieved we'd finally stopped pretending nothing had changed. I read your face at the wedding, she said before the waitress even poured. You found something. A letter, I answered. In Mom's handwriting. She never says the word father, but she writes the name Henry. Do you know him? Rose tapped the spoon against her mug, eyes on the swirl of cream. I knew him. Everyone did. He coached Legion Ball, fixed carburetors on weekends, and quoted scripture to balance out the poker nights he shouldn't have been at. Your mother and Henry, they were young once too. She met my gaze. He wanted to do right when he finally understood. He talked about talking to you. But your mother feared what this town does with a story, and Henry had a wife who didn't forgive rumors. The letter's careful lines flickered back. Ledgers kept, shoes a size too small, A name squeezed in the corner of an envelope like a secret, with a heartbeat. Did he try? I asked. To claim me? He tried to set money aside, Rose said. Not loudly, not cleanly. Quiet gifts, a savings bond, a trust he asked a friend to draft. He thought he could protect you without blowing your mother's life apart. Then why didn't he? The question was sharper than I intended. Why am I 20-something and hearing whispers at my mother's wedding instead of hearing the truth from either of them? Rose held it with me. Because shame moves faster than mail around here. Because your mother believed she was sparing you the worst. And because Henry believed he was sparing his other life the same. And because good intentions are clumsy when fear is steering. The waitress set down our coffees and a slice of lemon pie Rose hadn't ordered but always received. Rose slid the plate to the middle like it was neutral ground. I can give you something, she said, lowering her voice. From her tote, she drew a manila folder, thin edges softened by time. Inside lay a photocopy, the blue-black haze of a machine that had been the library's pride in 2004. He signed a will the year after you were born, she said. This is a copy of an early draft. It's not the version filed at the courthouse. But look. She flattened the page and anchored two corners with the salt and pepper shakers. The clauses marched down the paper in legal rhythm, and then there it was. A list of beneficiaries. To HR, it read, initials beside a birth month that was mine. In trust, for education and health, until age 25. A margin note in his hurried hand, confirm guardianship with LR. The room tilted a fraction. Ink felt like bone. My name wasn't naked on the page, but it was there, disguised and waiting. Heat rose behind my eyes. Anger, grief, a relief that felt treasonous. Why didn't anyone show me this? I kept it because your mother asked me to, Rose said. Back when she thought silence was a shelter. I'm giving it to you now because shelter turned into a cage. I traced the photocopied initials with one finger, willing them to become letters I could shout across a room. Will this hold up? It's not court-proof, she admitted, but it proves intention. It lines up with the letter you found, the birth certificate without a father's name, the dates I remember, the things people said when they didn't know I was listening. We ate pie the way people in grief eat anything, mechanically, grateful to be told what to do next. What do I do now? I asked. Start a ledger of your own, Rose said. Not of blame, of facts, dates, names, copies. Don't let anyone tell you your memory is messy. Keep your paper clean. When you ask for answers, do it with something you can hold. I slid the photocopy back into the folder and tucked it flat in my bag. The folder's weight steadied my spine. Outside the window, Main Street kept its slow choreography. 2 pickups at the light, the pharmacy's door swinging, a boy in a red hoodie skating past the barber pole. The ordinary persisted, indifferent to the earthquake beneath my ribs. The bell over the cafe door jingled again. Rose glanced past me, then stilled. Don't turn around, she whispered, and of course I turned. In the far corner, by the rack of free real estate flyers, sat Evelyn. A newspaper was lifted like a shield, but her eyes were above it, bright and watchful. When she realized she'd been seen, she smiled with the softness of someone admiring the weather and folded the paper in half as if she hadn't been listening this whole time. She gave me a little nod, a hostess acknowledging a reservation. My pulse climbed the back of my throat. I pressed the folder closer with my elbow, the edge of the photocopy kissing my ribs like a promise. Evelyn looked down again, smoothed the newsprint, and pretended to read. By the time the casserole lids clicked shut and the uncles settled into their chairs, Evelyn had already sewn a new rumor into the room. I was gold-digging Thomas. She didn't say the words out loud at first. She let them travel through the crackle of foil and the clink of serving spoons, through quiet nods and sympathetic eyebrows. When the circle widened enough, she turned and addressed me with a velvet smile that made every aunt lean closer. We all help family, she said, voice soft as napkins. Some of us even make sacrifices others don't see. Isn't that right, Hannah? I set my paper plate down. The photocopy of Henry's early will, tucked flat in the lining of my bag, felt like a second spine against my hip. I thought of Aunt Rose's warning, keep your paper clean. If you have something to say it plain, I replied. Evelyn sighed, a practiced sound. From her tote, she pulled a plastic sleeve with a single page inside and slid it across the buffet table as if she were dealing a playing card. At the top, in bold, was a heading, promissory note. Below it, my name. A number, $8,000, typed in a font the bank stopped using years ago. A signature that looked like mine if my hand had been drunk and in a hurry. Thomas cleared his throat. She came to me when tuition was tight, he told the room, as if narrating a kindness. I didn't want to embarrass her, so I kept quiet. Conversation thinned to a hush that wasn't quiet at all. I picked up the sleeve with 2 fingers. The paper smelled like copy toner and citrus hand cream. Where's the original? I asked Evelyn. That is the original, she said. We scanned it for our records. Your records, I repeated, tasting the words. I turned to Thomas. When exactly did I ask you for $8,000? He looked at Evelyn. She looked back with a tiny tilt of her head, the way you nod to a child who's almost remembered a line. Last spring, he said, end of April. I unlocked my phone and opened my banking app. My thumb moved on muscle memory to a folder I'd created after the wedding. Facts, capitals, so I couldn't forget who I worked for now. The account summary bloomed on the screen, then the statements. I mirrored my phone to the television mounted over the fireplace, a habit from family slideshows that made half the cousins sit up and the other half whisper, finally. End of April, I repeated, scrolling, the transactions lining up like beads. Here's my checking, here's my savings, here's every deposit and withdrawal from March through May. I enlarged the dates, then the running balances, then the check images, each one a little window I could open with a tap. Show me where $8,000 entered my accounts. Evelyn's smile held. Cash doesn't always get deposited. Then show me the withdrawal from yours, I said, still looking at Thomas. If you loaned me cash, it came from somewhere. ATM, teller, cashier's check, there's a trail. I swiped to a screen capture I had saved, the bank's message log from the week Thomas claimed I'd borrowed the money. Here is the text I sent you on April 29th, asking if Mom's insurance premium had cleared. Here is your reply about the fence posts. Here is everything we talked about that week. And none of it is $8,000? A cousin coughed. An aunt shifted. Someone's fork clinked to the rim of a plate. Evelyn slid a manicured nail to the signature line. You're not denying that's your handwriting? I'm saying it's not, I answered. I pulled up a photo I'd taken an hour earlier of a prescription label I'd signed for Mom. The same first letters, the same loops, the same spacing, but not the same slant, not the same pressure, not the strange break in my last name that only appeared on the note. And even if it were mine, a signature without a traceable transaction is a story, not a fact. Laura's hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles were pale. Hannah, she murmured, torn between apology and alarm. I took a breath that tasted like onion dip and courage. Look at the date on the promissory note, I said to the room. It's April 30th at 6 p.m. At 6:15 that evening, per my location history, I was on shift at the clinic. At 6:20, per this timestamp photo, I was triaging a boy with a split lip from baseball practice. At 7, per Mom's text, I dropped off soup. I tapped each piece of proof as it lit the screen. I couldn't have been at the bank, at the kitchen table, and at the clinic at the same time. Silence spread like a tablecloth. Evelyn regained her voice first. You could have signed it earlier, she said, the sweetness thinning. Then show me the earlier withdrawal, I replied. Show me the check copy. Show me any bank trail that doesn't begin and end in your printer. She didn't move. I let the quiet do what words could not. Then I took out my phone and within the banking app opened the secure message I had sent myself. A PDF of the audit log from my accounts, downloaded that morning at the branch, with the teller's stamp and the manager's initials. For anyone who wants to check later, I said, this is the log. It lives in my cloud and with Aunt Rose. If the document Evelyn brought today disappears, this won't. Thomas's jaw worked. He looked at the promissory note, at the television, at me, and finally at Evelyn, as if her face were a map he could no longer read. She needed help, Evelyn murmured to him, low, urgent. We helped. We can settle this quietly. He nodded once. Small, automatic. The room exhaled, but not with relief. I slid my phone into my pocket, the bank log already backed up in 3 places. I will always be grateful for help, I said, keeping my voice level. I will not carry lies. Evelyn's eyes cooled. The warmth turned off like a light. She gathered the plastic sleeve, smoothed its edge, and tucked it away. Thomas didn't look at me. Let's not make a scene, he said to no one in particular. Too late, I thought, feeling the folder at my hip and the calm that comes after choosing a side. The scene had already made itself, and Thomas, even with the evidence a foot from his hand, still leaned toward Evelyn as if her gravity were stronger than the facts in front of him. The night Evelyn called a family celebration arrived draped in false warmth. Lanterns strung across the rafters of Thomas's old barn glowed like staged sincerity, and platters of food lined the tables as if abundance could disguise intention. I walked in with Rose at my side, my pulse tapping against the folder in my bag. I knew what Evelyn planned. She wanted tonight to be her coronation. The moment she stood on the ashes of our doubts and declared herself sole heir to everything Thomas had built. She wasted no time. Family, she began, lifting a glass of sparkling cider. Tonight is more than a gathering. It is a passing of stewardship. Her voice carried like a sermon, each syllable sharpened to cut. Thomas has entrusted me with the management of all assets, land, and accounts for the good of us all. The air shifted. Plates paused in midair, whispers rippled like wind through wheat. My mother's gaze slid to the tablecloth. Thomas's eyes were glazed with fatigue or denial, and cousins who once teased me now waited for my reaction. Evelyn stood tall, her tailored dress immaculate, her smile both saintly and smug. I cleared my throat. Entrusted? I asked, keeping my tone level. That's a generous word for what's closer to appropriation. My hands didn't shake as I reached into my bag and withdrew 2 documents. The first, the audit log from my bank, stamped by the branch manager. The second, the photocopy of an earlier will Rose had given me. Henry's handwriting still vivid in ink that refused to fade. Evelyn's smile flickered, just a tremor, but I caught it. Old paper and numbers don't change what Thomas has decided, she said quickly. You don't understand how estates work, Hannah. Sometimes sacrifices must be made for stability. I laid the log on the table where the lanterns cast enough light for everyone to see the timestamps, the balances, the unbroken record of my financial life. This, I said, is proof that the debt Evelyn claimed I owed never existed. Fabricated evidence doesn't vanish when the printer runs out of ink. It stays recorded and it stays false. I turned to the photocopy, holding it high enough for the cousins, the uncles, the aunts, to glimpse. And this is Henry's early will. My name is written here. Plain, unaltered, acknowledged. He never intended for me to be erased. Gasps punctuated the air like breaking glass. One uncle muttered a curse under his breath. My mother pressed her hand to her lips, eyes glistening with both fear and recognition. Thomas leaned forward, blinking hard, staring at the log and the will as if they were written in a language he'd forgotten. Evelyn, he said finally, voice shaky. You told me. Don't, she cut him off, her tone slicing through the silence. But her control was slipping. Her knuckles whitened around the stem of her glass. This is the truth, I said, steady now. the words flowing like a current too strong to dam. Not rumor, not performance, facts, and everyone here deserves to know them. For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the faint hum of lantern bulbs overhead. Thomas's face slackened, his certainty crumbling. Evelyn's mask cracked, though she tried to hold it firm. The room itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the axis to tilt. I set the papers flat on the table, side by side, one proving fraud, the other proving legacy. Choose what you believe, I told them, my voice carrying in the silence. Thomas opened his mouth, but no words came. The room, filled with family and ghosts of loyalty, fell into a silence so heavy it felt like judgment itself. And in that charged, unbearable stillness, I knew the balance had shifted. The community hall smelled of coffee and lemon polish when we filed in the next afternoon. Folding chairs faced a long table where Thomas sat between my mother and Evelyn. Rose squeezed my hand and whispered, "Steady, Hannah." Evelyn tapped the microphone, smiling like a fox at a low fence. "Thank you for coming," she told our relatives. "Yesterday there was confusion. Today we end it." She lifted a stack of papers. "These show Hannah's debts and a pattern of irresponsibility. Thomas decided to safeguard the estate for the family because of this." A hum swept the room. My mother looked at me with an apology she couldn't speak. Copies slid down the row. When they reached my hands, I didn't flinch. The typeface was wrong. The signatures were too smooth. My middle initial shifted between pages. Sloppy. I stood. "If we're sharing documents, let's share all of them." I carried 2 items to the table under the fluorescent lights. The bank log I'd authenticated at the branch and a letter in my mother's handwriting dated 12 years ago. "First, the so-called debt," I said. "These transactions don't exist. The branch manager issued this certified printout this morning, case numbers at the bottom." Evelyn laughed softly. "Banks make mistakes." "Not the same one across 4 years and 3 accounts," I answered. "And not a mistake that mirrors your wording." I lifted the letter. "Second, context. My mother wrote this when I was 16. She names Henry as my father and explains why she kept quiet. She notes that he intended to provide for me through a fund." I set down the photocopied draft Will Rose had shown me. "Which appears in this earlier draft. Names changed later, but the intention is clear. I was not meant to be erased." Rose stood. "I can attest the letter is Laura's," she said. "Henry told me he wanted Hannah recognized." Evelyn's smile thinned. "This is sentimental theater. Thomas decided Hannah is not capable of stewardship. That is why he signed the papers." Thomas's hands tightened on the table edge. "Evelyn," he began. I faced him gently. "Did you read everything you signed?" I asked. "Or were pages put in front of you during your worst days with, just initial here? It's for the family?" He looked at the papers, then at me. Something in him cracked. "I didn't read all of it," he said. "She told me it would keep the peace. She said Hannah might sell the land." "I never said that," Evelyn hissed. "I said she's emotional." "Emotional isn't unfit," I said. "Fear isn't consent." I turned to the room. "I'm not asking for adoration. I'm asking for accuracy." Jacob lowered his pad. "Evelyn," he asked carefully, "who prepared these debt statements?" "I organized what Thomas told me," she said tightly. "That's what partners do." "Partners tell the truth," Rose replied. Thomas pushed back his chair. The scrape was loud and final. "I signed what I shouldn't have," he said. "I let Evelyn handle things because I was tired and she was confident. But the signatures on those debt papers look nothing like mine." He swallowed. "I was manipulated." The word moved through the hall like a ripple. Evelyn blinked, searching faces for a safe harbor and finding none. "This meeting is over," she announced. But her authority had drained away. She gathered her binder. As she strode down the aisle, chairs edged aside without courtesy. Disbelief followed her, cooling into disappointment, then into something colder. She pushed through the doors into daylight, and the room exhaled as if a weight had been lifted. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Thomas turned to me, eyes wet. "I'm sorry," he said to me, to my mother, to the family. I should have trusted blood and evidence over convenience. The hush that settled wasn't hostile. It made space. Behind me, Rose touched my shoulder. Ahead of me, a path I hadn't chosen finally came into view. In the wake of Evelyn's exit, truth stopped being an argument and simply stood among us. And for the first time in weeks, I believed it would hold. The morning after the confrontation, the farmhouse felt heavy with exhaustion. Thomas had fallen ill overnight, not gravely, but enough that his strength seemed sapped. He sat in the worn armchair by the window, wrapped in an old quilt, his face pale and his breath uneven. My mother, Laura, moved quietly about the kitchen, her silence more eloquent than any words. I carried a tray with tea and toast into the room, careful not to spill, and set it down beside him. "Thank you, Hannah," Thomas murmured, his voice hoarse. "I don't deserve this kindness after what I allowed." The memory of yesterday lingered between us. His confession, Evelyn's disgrace, the raw edges of family bonds laid bare. I pulled a chair close, resting my hands on my knees. "You're still my stepfather," I said evenly. "But if we're to live under one roof, there must be respect. I can't carry the weight of mistrust anymore." Laura sat nearby, her hands folded tightly, her gaze never leaving Thomas. She said nothing, but the lines around her eyes deepened with every breath he took. It was as if she was waiting, testing whether he would rise to the moment or retreat again. Thomas lowered his eyes. "I let her, Evelyn, speak for me because I thought peace was better than conflict. But peace built on silence is nothing but rot. I failed you, and I failed your mother." His hand trembled as he reached toward the side table, pulling out a thin envelope. He pressed it into my palm. Inside were the original papers, land titles, financial statements, a copy of the will drafted years ago before Evelyn's intrusion. "These are yours to safeguard," he whispered. "Proof that your place in this family was never meant to vanish." The air shifted. For the first time since the wedding, I felt like I was not chasing shadows. The documents were real, their weight undeniable. I slipped them into my bag, the crackle of paper loud in the quiet room. I looked at Thomas directly. "This doesn't erase what happened. Forgiveness won't come overnight, but if you want me to remain by your side, I need more than apologies. I need partnership." Laura's lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but she pressed them shut again, letting the silence hold. Her eyes softened, and I understood her silence as assent. The room felt fragile, like thin glass, but for the first time it wasn't breaking. It was holding. I stood, smoothing my shirt, ready to leave them to rest. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a message from Rose. I opened it quickly, expecting comfort. Instead, her words tightened my chest. "There's one more thing your mother wanted you to know." I froze at the doorframe, the echo of her message reverberating louder than Thomas's coughs or the creak of the old house. The papers in my bag were proof of survival, but Rose's words hinted at something deeper, an unfinished truth that might reshape everything again. And with that, the morning light streaming into the room no longer felt like closure. It felt like a curtain lifting on a secret still waiting to be revealed. The cemetery was quiet that afternoon, the kind of silence that pressed against my chest and made every breath feel deliberate. The air carried the faint scent of pine needles and damp earth, a reminder that winter was not far behind. Aunt Rose stood beside me, her scarf drawn tight against the cold. In her hands was a weathered envelope, its corners softened by time. "This," she said gently, placing it into my hands, "was your mother's last letter. She wanted you to have it when the moment was right." My fingers trembled as I slid the fragile paper from the envelope. The handwriting was unmistakably hers. Rounded, careful strokes that had comforted me in grocery lists and birthday notes. But here, each word seemed heavier, weighted with truths she hadn't dared speak aloud. "Hannah, if you're reading this, It means I no longer have the courage to keep silent. Your father's name is Henry. He wanted to acknowledge you, but fear and pride kept me from letting him. I thought I was protecting you, sparing you shame. But in truth, I was protecting myself. Forgive me. The words blurred as tears welled in my eyes. My throat burned, my body trembling as the realization sank in. All those years of questions, all the sidelong glances from relatives, all the evasive answers from my mother, they led here to this page. I pressed the letter to my chest, as if holding it there would let me feel her heartbeat again. The ache was sharp, but within it was something else too. Relief. For the first time, the shadow of not knowing was gone. The silence had a name, and that name was Henry. Rose placed a hand on my shoulder. She carried that guilt for years. She wanted you to know the truth, even if she couldn't say it herself. I turned toward the headstone, whispering, "Why didn't you trust me enough to tell me while you were alive? Did you think I would love you less?" The wind rustled through the trees as if offering a reply I couldn't quite grasp. Rose's voice softened, but there was an edge beneath it. "Now you stand at a crossroad. The truth is yours, Hannah, but so is the choice. You can hold on to the pain, or you can decide whether forgiveness, toward her, toward Henry, even toward yourself, is possible." I clutched the letter tighter, my tears falling onto the worn paper. All my life, I've felt like a ghost in my own family, and now I finally see the lines, but they cut deep. Rose pulled me into an embrace, steady and warm. "The truth sets us free, but freedom always comes with a price. What you do next will shape everything." The sun dipped lower, casting the cemetery in gold and shadow. I tucked the letter carefully back into its envelope, sliding it into my coat pocket as if sealing away a piece of myself. When I looked up, Rose's eyes held mine with quiet intensity. Her final words cut through the still air like a blade. "Now you must decide, Hannah. Will you forgive, or will you sever the ties forever?" The question hung between us, heavier than the sky above, leaving me suspended between the ache of betrayal and the fragile possibility of peace. Morning sunlight spilled across my desk, catching in the dust motes that drifted lazily through the air. The quiet of my own home was both foreign and welcome, as though I were learning to breathe again after holding it for far too long. I slid the wooden drawer open and placed the thick stack of papers inside. The original will, the letters, the photocopies, the bank logs, every fragile piece of the puzzle that had nearly broken me. My fingers lingered on the folder's edge, tracing the ridges of the manila cover, before I gently pushed the drawer shut. The click of the lock sounded final, like punctuation at the end of a sentence I'd been writing all my life. My thoughts flickered to the faces that had haunted this journey. My mother's steady yet secretive eyes, my aunt's quiet strength, my stepfather's wavering guilt, and Evelyn's cold, rehearsed smile as she left town with nothing but her bitterness intact. I realized then that I wasn't fighting to prove I belonged. I was fighting to understand the truth. The papers, the signatures, the testimony, they weren't just evidence in a feud, they were proof that silence could be broken, that lies could be unwound. Thomas came by once, awkward in his apology, hands trembling as he placed a bundle of untouched keys on my counter. "No more secrets," he said, voice low, the weight of his choices written in every wrinkle of his face. I looked at him, not with anger, but with the clear boundary of someone who had learned the cost of being underestimated. "I'll help keep the family together," I told him, "but only if respect comes first. If not, then we part ways." His nod was weary but sincere. For the first time, I believed he might mean it. In the stillness that followed, I whispered the truth aloud to myself. I don't need a title or a name carved into someone's inheritance. I only needed to know the truth. Saying it freed something inside me. It loosened the knots that had been twisting in my chest since the day of my mother's wedding, when whispers had first shattered the foundation I thought I stood on. The aroma of coffee drifted from the kitchen, mingling with the faint hum of the morning outside. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug and carried it back to the desk, placing it near the locked drawer. The papers inside no longer felt like weapons or shields. They were simply records of a battle I had already won. I leaned back in my chair, the sunlight touching my face, and allowed a small smile to break through. For once, it wasn't a smile of defiance or survival, but of peace. The drawer stayed closed, the past safely preserved, while I looked forward to the day ahead. And in that quiet moment, I knew the truth was enough. The drawer closed, and the stack of documents lay still as if they had never kept me awake at night. Peace only came when I dared to set boundaries, refusing to let anyone else decide the course of my life. I realized that filial piety does not mean blind obedience. To love and honor our parents, we must also preserve self-respect and maintain legal and financial independence so we are not exploited. Justice may arrive late, but if we hold firmly to evidence and truth, it will come and return the fairness we deserve. The scent of freshly cooked rice drifted from the kitchen, and the birds outside the porch sang as if announcing a brighter beginning. If this story touched you, please like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment. Type 1 if you agree. Type 2 if you think there is room for improvement.